History
The
teaches us
headlines
that these
have moved
patterns
on.
often repeat.
The smoke over
We must
Caracas
apply the
has
lessons
cleared.
learned from the
The
previous century
televised
to the
images of
challenges we
Nicolas
face today.
Maduro in handcuffs being escorted onto a U.S. transport plane are being played on a loop across every global news network.
History
The
teaches
media
us that
is
these
calling it a
patterns often
triumph
repeat.
of tactical
We must
precision,
apply the
a
lessons
victory
learned
for
from the previous
democracy,
century
and the
to the
end of a
challenges we face
long-standing
today.
dictatorship. But if you're only watching the helicopters, you're missing the balance sheet. What happened in Venezuela this week was
History
not
teaches
a
us that these
courtroom
patterns
story.
often
It was a
repeat.
systems
We
story.
must apply the
This
lessons
wasn't a
learned from the
regime
previous
change
century to
operation
the
for human
challenges we face
rights or
today.
drug cartels. It was a debt collection operation with gunships. It was the moment Washington decided that diplomacy had failed and that the survival of the United States dollar required a kinetic response. This is not just about the fate of one South American nation. It is a final, brutal warning to the emerging alliance known as BRICS. It is a signal to Beijing, Moscow, and Riyadh that while the U.S. may be economically stretched, its willingness to use force to protect the dollar's supremacy remains absolute. To understand why this happened now and not 5 years ago, we have to look past the spectacle. We have to look at the structural decay of the American energy system and the silent war over oil denomination. For decades, there has been an old rule in geopolitics that everyone pretends doesn't exist. You cannot sanction the countries that control your vital resources forever without facing catastrophic consequences. For over 20 years, the United States tried to defy this rule with Venezuela. They froze assets, recognized parallel governments, and shut Caracas out of the global financial system. But on December 28th, the system broke. Nicolas Maduro signed energy agreements with China worth $18 billion, agreements that were not priced in US dollars but in Chinese yuan. 2 days later, the spectacle began. This is the analysis of why the dollar is making its last stand in the oil fields of the Orinoco Belt and why the global South is now watching the end of an era. The media has spent years selling a specific narrative that the shale revolution made America energy independent. They told you that the United States is now the world's largest oil producer and therefore no longer needs to care about Latin America or the Middle East. This is a half-truth, and in geopolitics, a half-truth is a full lie. The United States does produce massive amounts of oil, but it produces light, sweet crude. It is like champagne, light, expensive, and bubbly. But American refineries, the industrial backbone of Texas and Louisiana, were built 50 years ago. They weren't designed to process champagne. They were designed to process the heavy, sour crude, the thick, sludge-like oil that exists in only a few places on Earth: Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Venezuela. America produces champagne, but its engines run on diesel. For decades, Washington solved this by importing heavy crude from Saudi Arabia. But that relationship is effectively dead. Riyadh is cutting production, joining BRICS, and ignoring calls from the White House. The Saudi crown prince has made it clear he is no longer a vassal state. This left Washington with a mathematical problem. They were running out of the specific type of oil needed to keep their refineries running, and they had already played their emergency card. Over the last 2 years, the administration drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to its lowest level since 1983. The SPR is meant for war, not for lowering gas prices during election cycles. With the SPR empty and the Saudis uncooperative, the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela became unavoidable. It wasn't about the volume of oil, it was about the denomination of that oil. The petrodollar system, established in 1974, is the magic trick of American prosperity. By ensuring that oil is only sold in dollars, the U.S. creates a permanent artificial demand for its currency. This allows Washington to print trillions of dollars, export that inflation to the rest of the world, and borrow at rates the economic fundamentals shouldn't allow. But when Maduro agreed to price his massive reserves in yuan, he threatened to reveal the secret that you can survive outside the dollar system. This is the nuclear option that triggered the raid. If Venezuela, sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves, successfully integrated into China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, it would have provided a blueprint for every other resource-rich nation to exit the dollar. Washington saw this as an existential threat. The American dollar is not backed by gold. It is backed by an agreement that oil must be sold in dollars. If that agreement dies, the exorbitant privilege dies with it. The raid was a demonstration of kinetic hegemony. While China builds railroads and Russia builds pipelines, America still has the world's most capable special forces. By extracting Maduro, the U.S. sent a direct message to the BRICS summit in Kazan. You can build alternative payment systems, but we can still reach the people who sign the contracts. However, there is a difference between tactical brilliance and strategic success. The operation was extraordinary from a military standpoint, but strategically, it may be catastrophic. Venezuela is not Panama in 1989. It is a nation of 30 million people with a complex military-economic structure. The Maduro government was not just one man, it was a system of thousands of generals who control every port, mine, and oil field. You can remove the president, but you cannot easily remove the Chavista network that has embedded itself into the state for 25 years. The world is watching. From Nigeria to Indonesia, countries are seeing that the petrodollar is no longer a trade agreement based on mutual benefit. It is now a hostage situation. When you have to use military force to secure access to resources and protect your currency, it is a sign of a declining power that no longer can compete on merit. China's response will not be military, it will be economic. Beijing now operates major ports across Peru, Brazil, and Panama. They have integrated themselves into the infrastructure of the Western Hemisphere to a point that they cannot be sanctioned out. While Trump may celebrate the daring raid, the structural reality remains. The world is moving toward a multipolar system. The U.S. has 3 paths forward, and none of them are clean. They can attempt a controlled transition, which requires years of institution building in a fractured country. They can watch as Venezuela fragments into regional power centers, creating an Iraq-style vacuum on their own doorstep. Or they can face an economic counterpressure where China and Russia turn Venezuela into a long-term battleground. The helicopters have left Caracas, but the structural damage to the international system is permanent. The trust that held the world together, the idea that sovereignty mattered and force was the last resort, is gone. Nations will remember that when an oil-rich country tried to trade outside the dollar, the elite units came in the night. This fear does not create loyalty, it creates an exodus. The petrodollar era is ending, not because of a sudden collapse, but because the United States just demonstrated that the system is now based on pure coercion. In the long run, coercion is always more expensive than cooperation. The tragedy is that change was always coming. But by choosing the gun over the negotiation table, Washington has ensured that the transition will be far more volatile than it needed to be. The raid on Venezuela was the dollar's last stand. It showed that the U.S. can still win the battle, but it is rapidly losing the war for global trust. The world is reorganizing, new alliances are forming, and the systemic eye is watching as the old world order makes its final, desperate move. Subscribe to the Systemic Eye. We don't watch the headlines, we watch the system. See the world for what it is, not what they want you to see. Until next time.